David, there became a more seamless way of connecting Philip and David to one another through the intranet or through the local office infrastructures. And of course, that's since blown outside the offices and now we're all hooked and connected. It's very easy for me to work with somebody in Bangalore or somebody in San Francisco. It's just as easy to do that as it is to work with somebody in Dublin. And the kick for the frustration that I was having sitting in an environment that was doing really good fundamental research was that we weren't applying it where it mattered. And it felt like Europe as a whole was losing its way on applied research. And so as I watched this evolving PC on my desk, I became more interested in what was going on inside that machine. And the software side of it, which was Microsoft, and the hardware side of it, which was Intel. And being an electrons and atoms guy, I found myself filtering over to Intel, where I've spent the bulk of my career. And during that time, I started, the first couple of years was in Portland in Oregon, in the research house in Portland. Then the second research facilities in California, moved there. Then came back to Ireland, we did a factory startup here, and I've been mostly in Ireland ever since. I did a fair amount of traveling over and back. I've been in Ireland for the last 2 years, but the previous 3 years was in Phoenix, startup factory over there. So mobility is an advantage. It's something of an expectation, and it's certainly an advantage if you can do it. So despite the connections, sometimes you've got to physically move. And my job has changed every couple of years. I think whether your innovation is core to what ICT does, that's why there are many startup companies, many Clearwires that can present, many Googles that can start small and make it large. And innovation is key to how this business works in general. The large companies have to stay innovative, or you don't stay in this game. The core, actually the best way to illustrate this is with the list of Intel CEOs. So our first CEO was Robert Noyce, now dead, but Noyce was is a Nobel Prize laureate for invention of the integrated circuit, which is the fundamental part on which the business that I operate in and that the ICT business is built on is made. Our second up was a guy called Gordon Moore, who some of you may have heard of, usually referenced through Moore's Law. You heard of the term Moore's Law? And his observation was that everything in this business changes by a factor of 2 every 2 years. Doesn't sound like that big a deal, right? Until you sequence them for a bit. Because 2 becomes 4, becomes 8, becomes 16, 32, 64, 128. It's an exponential. The rate of change is pretty extraordinary. And what happens in this business when you live on that rate of change is pretty extraordinary. So that's been the foundation for, Intel's hung around in this business a bit longer than most, but because of that innovation, because of the constant reinvestment, it's pretty easy to look at Intel revenue and profitability numbers. We basically have a revenue of 10 billion a quarter. The margins are somewhat north of 50%, so you end up with 5-6 billion left over when you've sold your stuff. And then 3 of that billion goes into research and manufacturing, and you're left with a couple of $1 billion to put in the bank. So that's what Intel does every 3 months. That in order to hold those kind of margins, you have to heavily reinvest, and you have to invest in the kind of people who can be innovative. So how can an Intel or a Google or a startup company survive in this country? If what you depend on is that you can do good work and you can do it fairly cheaply, you're screwed. It is only time till you go out of business. That can be done and will be done by smart people in India. That can be done and will be done by smart people in China. You have to find some differentiating capability or competence for what you do as an individual. For Mary Inc. or John Inc., you have to work out what your unique value proposition is. And whether you present that value proposition in the form of your own startup company, or by joining a small company, joining a medium company, or joining a large company, you better get clear what it is that you have to offer that makes you that key individual or that key employee that's going to help continue to accelerate what ICT is and what ICT does. So the industry itself, the minority of information communications technology people actually work directly on information communications and technology. We're actually an odd collection of folk for that reason, as a trio, because we're stuck in the middle of it, making the silicon or making the software that runs this. The bulk of people who work in ICT are sitting in the retail businesses or in the banking businesses. I shouldn't say banking, bad word at the moment, but it's the folk who make the productivity and infrastructural changes in all the businesses wrapped around us is where ICT takes most of its form. And so the sources of jobs are pretty broad and diverse for all of us in this room. So if I flick to my final lens, my final foil on this is what this means through your lens. This would be my suggestion of what you should be doing. You should start by calibrating. So understand your capabilities and your interests. There's nothing wrong with being selfish. In fact, quite the reverse. If you are not selfish at the front end in determining what it is that you like, because it's what you like is what you will be good at. If you choose to do work because it seems like it's a convenient and smart thing to do and that it's in demand, if that's the only motivation you have, it's only time till you fail. Work out what it is you have a passion for and an interest in. That's the first part of your Venn diagram. Work out what the market needs. Whether that's your own startup, a small business, a medium or a large business, work out what it is and work out where the overlap is between those two. That's your core responsibility, and this sequence of steps will help you there. So calibrate, understand those capabilities and interests. There are many ways of doing that. Usually I find talking to my spouse is my main way of getting recalibrated on what my laundry list of problems are. So talk to somebody who knows you well, inside work or outside of work, of course, but there are many other tools and techniques available to you. So if you check, for example, if you've done DISC is a particularly useful tool. For 20 bucks you'll do an online DISC assessment. A pretty good indicator, gives you some calibration of where you sit in your operating style. That has nothing to do with technical competencies. It's your, do you like fast pace or not? Are you more interested in demanding that stuff get done or making sure it got done correctly, etc. So DISC is a useful tool. If you haven't done it, I'd suggest doing it. There are many Strength Finder books out there that you can use to help you understand and calibrate on your core competencies. I particularly like the collection of stuff done by a guy called Marcus Buckingham. I'm sure some of you will have come across Marcus in some form or other. But if you buy a Buckingham book, Now Discover Your Strengths, you go to an online page, so you pay your €10 for that. You get access to an online page where you do an assessment, and it'll give you a list of core competencies, show you where you sit in the general population. There's a site called careersportal.ie. If you haven't been to it, please go to it. Of the many things that are on there, there are tools that, again, will facilitate you on a self-learning and self-discovery. So everything I've just described has exactly nothing to do with your core technical competencies. They are critical, or you don't get through the door and you will not be successful in this business. But it is not what differentiates folk, and if I'm honest, I think it's probably the lesser important on the most successful people I've seen. It's mostly about your sense of energy, your willingness to integrate and cooperate with folk, your sense of ownership and clarity of accountability that you take, your sense of getting action and getting stuff done is core to whether you apply the core technical competencies you have or not. So leverage